Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel and happy October. It's the Halloween season, which means it's time for my annual series of retro Halloween reviews. And in keeping with the model I've set myself up with for this entire year, I'll be doing double feature retro reviews, which unfortunately means you're not going to be getting an abundance of horror reviews like in previous years. But it's still going to be fun regardless. So without further ado, let's get today's review started. This is my review for the Fear Street Trilogy, directed by Leigh Janiak, and came out on Netflix in July of 2021, 1 week after another. These movies are loosely based off the books written by R.L. Stine, the same author that gave us Goosebumps, and consist of 3 movies: Fear Street 1994, Fear Street 1978, and Fear Street 1666. Before I continue, if you like this review and you want to see more videos like this in the future, then you can go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel and make sure to hit the bell button to get a notification when a new video comes out. Anyway, let's continue with the review. So I have actually been looking forward to reviewing this trilogy for a while. I actually saw the Fear Street movies when they came out on Netflix in 2021, and at that time you got to keep in mind that we were coming off of the heels of the COVID pandemic. So movies weren't being released in abundance the way they are right now. So I was looking to Netflix, Disney Plus, and other streaming services. And when I heard about this series of films and that they were gonna be released one after the other weekly, that sounded like a great idea. So I just waited for all of them to get released, and then I binged all of them in one day. And I actually wanted to try to review these movies last year for Halloween and the year prior for Halloween. But unfortunately, there were circumstances that just didn't allow me to do that. But I'm now finally tackling this series of movies, and just like other compilation reviews I've done, like Jackass or Grindhouse and Crank, I'm gonna be reviewing the movies individually themselves and then give you an overall rating of the trilogy. Since all 3 of these movies have an overarching story to where you can't really watch one of them without the other, I figured to just include all of them in this one video. So we're gonna start things off with Fear Street 1994, which, as the title suggests, takes place in 1994. The movie is set in the fictional town of Shadyside, which has been cursed for centuries, and things don't get any better when a couple of teenagers are killed in a shopping mall, and all these supernatural things start happening throughout the town. So a group of teenagers have to stop these monsters, but also discover the curse of Shadyside, and this leads into the next set of movies. This is very much like one of those slick teen horror movies that came out in the wake of Scream's success. It's not meta in the way that Scream is, but it does focus on a bunch of teenagers who are kind of self-aware of the type of movie they're in. They have witty dialogue. There's a lot of songs that play on the soundtrack that reflect the 90s. It very much captures the feeling of one of those movies, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Even though I did make the argument earlier that you can't watch one of these movies without the other, one thing that all of these movies do really well is that they feel like their own thing. This movie is like those horror movies from the late 90s, and I enjoyed the characters. It's got some really gruesome kills. I love the lighting in this movie, where it's just bathed in color and it's very distinct. Like there's dark blues, dark reds. I just love the way this movie looks. I will say, however, that in terms of the actors, your lead, Chiara Madeira, is a little flat at points. There are some times where her line delivery just doesn't really work, and her character, Dina, does some pretty unlikable things at the beginning of the movie. So it does get off to a rocky start with a pretty unlikable protagonist. But as the movie went along and we got to spend more time with these characters, I warmed up to her, I warmed up to her brother, the other friends in their group, to the point when the deaths happened, I felt a little sad, especially since some of these deaths are so brutal that these characters didn't really deserve it. It's a pretty good movie. It does get off to a rocky start, but by the end of it, it wins itself over. And I also love how it plants seeds of the overall lore that feeds into this series of movies, but it has a definitive ending. Much like with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, this movie is a part one, and it does leave the door open for the next film, but this particular story does have an ending, so I enjoyed that a lot. The second movie in this trilogy, Fear Street 1978, is definitely more akin to those campground movies that came out in the wake of Friday the 13th. And we follow a completely different character this time, played by Sadie Sink from Stranger Things. And much like with the previous movie, while it has elements that connect all three of these movies together and form one overreaching story, this one is in a way self-contained. The movie opens up as a continuation from the last film, but then jumps into 1978 setting. And much like with the last movie, it's got some great kills, I enjoyed the characters, the acting's a little better from the cast this time around, and it felt like a really good throwback movie to this type of horror, but done better than a majority of the Friday the 13th movies that came out in the 80s. This is honestly my least favorite of the trilogy, but I still found it to be entertaining regardless. And then that brings us to Fear Street 1666, which actually works as two movies in itself. The first half of this movie takes place in 1666, so we get the whole origin of the town Shadyside, we get to know Sarah Fear, how she's executed for witchcraft, and the whole curse that has plagued Shadyside for centuries. What's really cool about this is that all the actors from the past two movies are essentially playing different characters, whether they have some relation to their characters from the previous movies, like Sadie Sink's character, or if they're just playing completely different characters like Kiana Madeira does. It's basically the movie that ties everything together and gives us more context to all the lore that was dropped in the first two movies. Then when we get into the second half of the movie, which is 1994 Part 2, the movie goes, all right, we've built up the lore, we've set up the backstory, let's go kill these monsters and end this curse once and for all. And by that time, I was pumped. Like, I was on board with the last half of this movie, and I thought it stick the landing. Like, it does a really great job at tying everything together. If you just binged all three of these movies in one sitting, you will not be disappointed, because parts 1 and 2 feel like their own movies, but all the little tidbits that feed into the final film pay off very well. The reason I decided to review all three of these movies in one video is because on their own, I honestly didn't have a whole lot to talk about. And the other reason is because they're so consistent with one another that I have no choice but to give them all the same rating. For horror fans, I'd say worth seeing in your lifetime. Yes, they do borrow elements from other subgenres of horror movies, but they're entertaining and well made to a point where you won't feel like these are rip-offs of those other movies. If you're not a horror fan, I'd say good but not great. I feel like this could really work as an interesting gateway to horror movies. Because each of these movies play into a different subgenre of horror, this would be a great introduction to people who are starting to get into horror and want to get into the more gruesome stuff, because all three of these movies are rated R, and there are some really gruesome kills in it. Either way you look at it, whether you're a horror fan or not, I think the Fear Street trilogy is a good time. And there is word of a fourth movie being made in this series. I'll watch it. I enjoyed these three movies enough that I'll see what they have in store for part 4. And there you go, that's my review for the Fear Street trilogy. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, come Halloween night, I'll be reviewing the big one, the granddaddy of all horror movies, what has been cited to be the scariest movie ever made. I will finally be covering The Exorcist. Last year I reviewed its terrible, terrible legacy sequel from Blumhouse, Exorcist Believer, but now it's finally time to watch the original for the first time, and I am excited and horrified all at once. So until then, thank you guys for watching this video. Thank you for being subscribed to the channel if you are. And I also want to give a special thank you to my YouTube members right over here, including our newest member, Random Shit 2828. It's a really amusing name. So thank you, Random Shit, for joining as a YouTube member. And for those of you out there who are not YouTube members, but you want to help support the channel even more, you can do so for as little as $1.99 a month. Not only do you get early access to all of my videos, including this one, but you get exclusive access to stuff that nobody else gets access to, including my top 5 favorite series, and a brand new perk that I'll be introducing once we hit 10 members on YouTube. So again, I hope you consider joining as a YouTube member in the future. And until next time, I want to know what you guys think about the Fear Street trilogy. Whatever your opinions are, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. If you want to find me elsewhere on the internet, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads, and my theme park and travel channel right here on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.